The question I have for today's episode is about the UK specialty coffee roasting market. Are we in a race to the bottom? Hello and welcome to Coffee with Maxwell. So at the beginning of this episode, I must declare my conflict, probably more than any of the other episodes. This is specifically about the marketplace of which I am involved in through one of my businesses, Kelowna Coffee, which is the UK specialty coffee roasting market. Now, it reminds me a lot of taking part in barista competitions. Now, really, the people who get to learn and understand and dig in and see how the competitions really work are either competitors or judges. And so, as a competitor, you take part more and more and you become more exposed to inconsistencies in judging, how subjective the competition really is and how lots of it doesn't make sense. But once you get that exposure, you're not in a position to really challenge it because the dynamic between judges and competitors is that, well, it's really the power is with the judges, and the competitor, whatever they see, they can't really speak out about it because they're conflicted. It will be seen as sour grapes, that, you know, sore loser, etc., etc. And that's really interesting. And there's a similar dynamic, I think, in the UK specialty coffee roasting market, which is people who are working in this space talk about this problem. And I do believe it is a problem. And generally the people talking about it are in a business that's part of that race. So it doesn't really get vocalized particularly often. Okay, so what am I talking about? Well, we'll talk about COVID a bit, because how can we not? But this problem was in full flow pre-COVID. It'll be interesting to see if COVID makes it worse. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. We'll get onto that a little bit later. Now, we opened our coffee shop, Kelowna & Smalls, in Bath in 2009. And for the first 6 years, we were a multi-roaster cafe, and we collaborate with other roasters, and we would showcase different coffees, not just from the UK, but from around the world on the bar. We would collaborate in more depth around barista competitions, etc. And when we started there, we were buying coffee in sort of, reasonable volumes. It's quite a busy cafe quite quickly, from different roasters. And typically we were looking at between 15 and 20 pound a kilo for a wholesale price of roasted coffee. Now, 12 years ago, it wasn't as easy to get hold of high scoring coffee, and there wasn't as much of it being grown. And so you're talking here sort of really nice coffees, and obviously considering sort of different socio-economic impacts on pricing based on where the coffee comes from, you're sort of talking about 84, 85 point coffees for this kind of price. And at the same time, 250 grams of coffee was being sold on a roaster's website for £5 to £6 plus postage. Let's fast forward to 2021, or in fact, 2019, just before COVID. That e-commerce price has gone up closer to £8 to £10 for the same kind of coffees. It's almost doubled. But whilst that's happened and that price has been steadily going up, something entirely different has been happening with wholesale coffee supply. The price has been coming down. Now, this is not across the board, of course, but it is a trend. It is not a one-off. It's quite prolific. There's a lot of people taking part in this race to win accounts off each other by charging less. Now, it is becoming increasingly common for a cafe to be approached and the price to quickly make its way down to around £10 a kilo. The wholesale per kilo price is now close to the 250 gram straight to consumer price. When you think about what's offered with the coffee, it's actually a lower price. When you think about the free equipment, the training, the maintenance. Now, I've obviously separated out straight to consumer and wholesale. Okay, and in a way, this is how most specialty coffee companies operate in the UK. And before COVID, before the boom in online coffee, the majority of specialty coffee roasteries, nearly all of their business and all of their growth was from the supply of freshly roasted coffee to the cafe scene. Now, you were seeing that branch out a bit further, going more into office supply and restaurants and looking at these other places you could sell great coffee. As the appetite for great coffee has increased across multiple sectors, there's an opportunity there for specialty coffee. But it was fair to say that it would be typical for a roastery to be 90% wholesale and 10% straight to consumer, 10% on the website. Now, that's important because it means that the pricing that's being used for the majority of the coffee roasteries trade is that lower price. Now, where's this trend coming from? Well, it's pretty obvious, right? Which is it's a competitive, saturated marketplace. But I think there's a few more interesting things going on here than simply that. And I also think that the ramifications are important to discuss. You may say, okay, well, you know, it's going to be a race to the bottom and it will level itself out again and it will be a bubble. I mean, I hope so, but I also just want to talk about what that means for specialty coffee as a movement. So when will we say the specialty coffee scene really started in the UK? I think in the UK it was probably close to 15 years ago. And now you have literally around the UK hundreds and hundreds of specialty or micro roastery. And that scene was growing quite steadily. And when did you start to see the prices come down? Well, it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And what's interesting about the movement is it wasn't easy, right? There was interest, which was great, but to win an account, you were charging more than the incumbent supplier because, you know, for someone to move from a commercial coffee to, you know, fresh specialty coffee, it was cost more. What helped you was that there was lots of new openings and new shops. So a new shop doesn't have an existing supplier with a price in its head. You know, it's saying, well, we want to open a specialty coffee roastery. What does it cost? So you're sort of creating that market price as you go. And yes, it's to do with a competitive, saturated market. You've got a lot more roasteries. There's not enough cafes to go around. And when I say enough, this is a fascinating question for anybody working in any field, in any business, is what is enough? As in, when we say there's not enough, we say, well, there's not enough to grow at the rate we want to grow at, which is what rate? So somebody decides that, right? You know, you sit around in your business and you go, well, what looks good? 20% year-on-year growth, 40% year-on-year growth, 100% year-on-year growth. What do we expect our business in this sector to grow at? And just as an aside, this is an interesting side of business anyway, which is you set a goal. And where does that goal come from? And if you don't meet that goal, that's failure, right? And then the salespeople and the commercial team within that business around that goal, well, they've been set their goal, right? Their KPI or their key performance indicator. And, you know, of course, to do their job well within the constructs of the business that they're a part of, they need to achieve that goal. But what I saw about 4 or 5 years ago was a marketplace where it wasn't as easy to grow as it used to be. And that's two things. That's not just less cafe openings and more roasteries. It's also that the roasteries are bigger. And if you look at any bigger company, well, of course, your growth slows. And maybe that's one of the things that is happening, is that businesses are testing the market to see how much, at what rate they can continue to grow at now that they are, you know, a medium-sized business. A lot of those businesses that were small are actually sort of medium-sized now, and they're butting up against each other. And it's getting harder to grow at the same rates they used to grow at before. And I think one of my hypotheses is that a certain company is not based in London, but is based in a more economically deprived area of the UK, found itself in a competitive position. By being based in a more economically deprived part of the UK, it means that the wages are cheaper, it means that the rent is cheaper, it means that there are subsidies. And what this basically means is you can make a bag of roasted coffee for less money. It's no different to running a cafe, right? Like, it costs more money to run a cafe in London than it does in most places outside of London. And it'll be the same with a roastery. It will cost more to run a roastery in London. And so I saw this particular roastery going hard into the London market with surprisingly low prices. Okay, now it is important to note here that this isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's fair play. And you would argue that it's good to grow a successful business and bring opportunity and employment to an economically deprived area. As we'll get onto a bit later in this video though, the pricing structure here isn't simply a small benefit from that lower fixed cost base. The real issue, I think, in a lot of this pricing war is the full service, the full offer of what comes with that bag of coffee at that price. Now these extras to me are particularly interesting. And because they affect something that you call your deliverable margin. Yes, you charge £15 a kilo for a house espresso, but actually, by the time you take off the free shipping, and then you take off however many site visits and how much training you do, the free on loan equipment, which costs you as a roastery X months to supply, or the maintenance, or the overhauls each year, when you take all of that out, how much are you actually left with? Now, if we go to Italy, Italy have been doing this for a long time. They've had espresso bars and roasteries supplying espresso bars for, well, a century. And they've been through this process. And it's very obvious now. You say, okay, well, here's a kilo of coffee at this price, X number of euros. And if you would like a grinder on loan, that's a few euros more a kilo. And if you would like an espresso machine, that's a few more euros a kilo. And then it's kind of amazing. In some parts of Italy, it will go to the point where if you'd like, the bar repolished and the shop front painted each year, that's another X number of euros a kilo. So it makes sense that you've got your product, and then as you add on services, the price per kilo goes up. What's crazy about the UK scene right now is they're non-related. In fact, a typical sales channel goes the opposite way. The price of the coffee gets negotiated down, down, and down, and then, when it's already low, then equipment and services and training gets lumped on top. It's crazy, right? The price doesn't go back up. And with the deliverable margin, I'll give you an example. I remember an account opportunity with a 40-site restaurant. Now, because it's a restaurant that didn't focus on coffee, the volumes weren't high. They were like 5 kilos of coffee per store per week. And they wanted coffee at £11, £12 a kilo. But the real killer was they wanted a site visit to help with training for every store per month. That's 40 sites. You'd be lucky if you hired 2 full-time account managers just for that account to be able to actually achieve that, to actually visit each site once a month. And as soon as you do the maths, you're just losing money on it. And that's another side here for cafes, which is, are they really getting what they were promised? I think it's easy to not deliver. Now, if you're a cafe operator, do the maths yourself, right? You may be thrilled that you got a cheap price per kilo, but if your account isn't making money for the roastery, your account is not sustainable for that roastery, which means in the long term, you will not get the best service and the best support. This is a very simple premise in a business relationship, which is the salesperson may win the account and be like, woohoo, look, I hit my targets for the week. But then you're in a partnership, and it's not a good partnership, because actually at the price per kilo and the equipment and the training, you're not a sustainable account for that roastery, right? And what that means is over time, the roastery will come to resent your account. It just will. They won't tell you that, but they will. You won't be at the top of the pile. You will not be an important account to them. You're a loss-making account, right? And you also have to ask yourself the other question as a cafe being supplied with that coffee. How good do you really think the coffee is in that kilo? The price per kilo to win an account, especially in somewhere like London, has moved, and it's moved down. Right? It's not a one-off, it's moved down. And then you get to this interesting place like, well, who's at fault? Is it the cafes or the roasteries, or are they both complicit? Well, of course it's both, right? But I still feel like it's the roastery more than the cafe. There's no way a cafe, I had one debate about how all coffee roasteries look the same now. And when I was doing the sourcing video, I did talk to a green company who said, look, specialty coffee is as much an aesthetic as it is a quality of coffee. And I think that's a fair point, which is, we're part of a scene that looks a certain way. And so a cafe wants to buy from a roastery that's cool, basically, that fits into that scene of specialty coffee. And so that's really interesting, is that roasters have built these brands with these values, and they're now using that brand to grow aggressively with cheaper coffee. Is this race to the bottom really just coming from a saturated competitive market, an independent market of cafes, desperate to win another account of 20 kilos a week, and actually they're eating into their sustainability of their business? I don't think it is that simple, and I think a lot of the dynamic that you see in the specialty market right now is also down to what's perceived as the investment opportunity in specialty coffee. I think you can trace this back to the Blue Bottle acquisition, and before that, the Intelligentsia, Stumptown acquisitions, etc. Okay, so these businesses, and the Blue Bottle one in particular, but it starts with Intelligentsia, Stumptown, Johan and Nystrom. Basically, JAB came out of nowhere and suddenly became one of the largest coffee companies in the world. And it did a lot of that through acquisition, merger and acquisition. pick up and buy. And it was at a time, a really interesting moment in time, where these coffee roasteries have been going 20 odd years, and they're at a point where they're like, you know what, yeah, we've done an amazing thing, it's been brilliant, it's time to hand on the torch, hand on the baton. And it's not even just that, in many cases, JAB was offering financing for them to do more with their supply chain, to grow their business to the next level. Whatever the exact psychology, there was a time where businesses were getting bought. People call it consolidation, quite common in most markets. And then the Blue Bottle one was the crazy one, purely because the price it got sold at was so high. Now, I think Blue Bottle's a bit of a unicorn myself, because I think it was started in an area that's brilliant, one of the best places in the world to find funding and to get funding at very high valuations, normally around technology, Silicon Valley, San Francisco. And it was very clever, the people behind it, growing it into this brand. And then add to that you've built this brand, that you've got a portfolio battle between Nestle and JAB. So what's happening at Nestle is, they're struggling to grow around the world. They're losing market share in different countries, and they're going, right, what are the trends? And one of them is these younger specialty coffee brands. And suddenly it's like, well, we really need this. And so you pay an increased price for it. I don't think we'll see another Blue Bottle. Luckin Coffee, which was heavily funded out of China, has filed for bankruptcy. And this really comes down to, what do you think a coffee company is worth? Now, obviously, rather than just roasting coffee, you have a brand, and it's the brand that's really valuable. But even with a brand, what are they worth? Now, of course, they're worth what anyone will pay for them. That's what's amazing about any marketplace. But actually, if you benchmark and you say, okay, what is a roastery? Well, a roastery is a food production facility. Okay, it is, and it's producing, yes, it has a brand. So if you look at similar businesses in food production, businesses that produce something, brand it and sell it to people, a food product, and you look at mergers and acquisitions in that space, well, the valuations are nowhere near as high as Blue Bottle. They are much more sustainable, 2 to 3 times revenue. So that means, that a business could sell for 2 to 3 times the money it's turning over, because valuation often drives the behavior within a business. Simply put, if at some point in the future you can sell the business for 10 times revenue, right? It means you can afford to lose more in the meantime. Potentially. You'd be surprised how often there is a business model which is loss-making. And I think you'd be surprised how many coffee roasteries in the UK space, particularly in London, are now loss-making. And not just coffee roasteries, but coffee shop rollouts. Both cases, coffee shop rollouts and roasteries. If you are an entrepreneur, an investor, and you see Blue Bottle bought by Nestle for that price, you see an opportunity in this space of specialty coffee. And what it means is you think, okay, if we can grow a brand that's valuable in that space and get some kind of critical recognition, we'll be able to sell for a huge multiple. If you're thinking like that, like, oh, in the future we can sell it for X, the appetite for losses is greater, because you'll make it back on the exit, right? Again, like with my sourcing claims video, there are sustainable roasteries in London, some very long-standing, sustainable, impressive roasteries that stick to their guns and say, no, we believe in our pricing, it's important and sustainable to price properly, and we're not going to take part in this race to the bottom. But very often with an investment mindset is you need to hit things like critical mass. So you need to win a load of customers, and you need to show growth. So a lot of that race is about showing growth. And the salespeople who are hired are told, we need to show growth. A lot of the ones I've spoken to don't really understand why or how it works. They're just aggressively going after winning more accounts. I mean, I speak to quite a few salespeople who don't even have a margin target, which means they don't even have a revenue target. Their target is just to sell kilos of roasted coffee, and whatever that takes, right? That's what success looks for them in that sales role. And that will be coming from the top down, because from the top down, you want to show we've grown to this many, we have this many accounts, etc. And you want to show that back to investors. And so I don't think you can have a conversation about the race to the bottom in the UK market without actually recognizing the mindset behind a lot of the businesses that have entered the space in the last 5 to 10 years. And often what happens is those models, those loss-making models, have deep pockets somewhere. Maybe it's investors who keep putting money in, keep doubling down, or maybe it's high net worth individuals who run it as a lifestyle project, who are happy to lose lots of money. Either way, these businesses are impacting the marketplace. And the question is really, how long are those people happy to lose money for? And I think in some cases, you look at the accounts of some of them, they've been losing money for a long time. And you know, how long are they going to keep losing it for? You might say to me, well, okay, Max, it is what it is. The market, all markets go through these kind of phases, and it is what it is. It'll level itself out. And I think if I come back to the sourcing video, my concern, why I think it's such a problem, is because of that video. It's because we're a values-driven space, right? We're running businesses that appeal to customers because we've set our values. We said, this is what we believe in, right? Great coffee, sustainable sourcing, quality, etc., etc. But this race to the bottom does not help those things at all, right? It actually makes them harder and harder and harder. And that's why the sourcing claims one is interesting to me, which is you use another sourcing claim that you don't have to verify to win another account at a cheaper price. Your prices go down. You're not in a sustainable position. If we go back to that sourcing video again, it's saying, okay, this is where we're at. We've got a lot more to do. We're not doing anywhere near enough. And in the conversations I've had about, especially the verification, the third-party auditing, the most common thing that I get told is, well, Maxwell, there's not enough money in the supply chain. Well, I bet there isn't. If you're all racing to the bottom, I'm sure there's not enough money to actually improve the sustainability of your sourcing program, to improve the diversity and equality within your organization, to look at initiatives around having a lower impact in the way you do things, because it all costs money and resource. And so if you think about it this way, if you had to commit to your values and you had to verify them, then you'd have to figure out how to make it work from a resource point of view. And maybe you would need to charge more per kilo. You need to be in a position with your business where growing your business helps you grow your values, not detract away from them. So winning more business and growing should allow you to do more. But if the only way for you to grow is to squeeze your margin down and be loss-making, you're going to find yourself in a position where you can't do more. Just from a personal point of view, I'm sitting there going, I want to innovate more. I want to dig into our supply chain. I want to evolve our sourcing policies. I want to look at the impact we're having, the materials we're using, the efficiencies of our business. And you need profit to do that. You need profit to grow that kind of business. Unless, of course, you've got really deep pockets and you can run at losses forever. But that's never going to be the case, right? Even investors with deep pockets, they get bored of losing money. And I guess with this topic in particular, it's up to each company what it wants to sell coffee at. It's a free market, right? But really, I wanted to do this episode to talk about what that means. And I don't know if everybody involved in that race to the bottom really is thinking about what it means. It's very easy to get caught up in the race. For a cafe operator though, and the buyer of the coffee, I would like to say that a low price should be an alarm bell for you. The thing is, it is a free marketplace. And people will sell and buy whatever they wish. But again, it's about the value side of it, isn't it? It's about it being what you say it is. So if you're a cafe operator that is focused on specialty coffee and talks about sustainable pricing, and then you pay your roaster a very low price, and you did a tender program where you got all the roasters to fight out against each other for the cheapest price, as a cafe operator, are you really approaching the purchasing of your coffee in a sustainable way? I mean, yes, you say, well, the roaster promised me it was sustainable. Well, just think a little bit further. If you only pay the roaster X number, there's only so much they can do with that price per kilo in terms of sourcing, in terms of what they pay their roastery staff, etc., etc. So I think there's two sides here. There's roasteries saying, no, we're not going to go below that price for that quality. Or, that's a really important one to me, is that you could do a very nice coffee at a price per kilo, which is low, but you couldn't then do the training, then do the free equipment. So some prices that mean something, but also, and so really I think, you know, I would like to appeal to both sides, which is a cafe operator that says to its customers it buys great coffee and pays a sustainable price and focuses on quality. Well, you can't really claim that if you're buying really cheap coffee. Now, maybe you're like, well, oh, I've got a great deal off the roaster and they're paying a good amount to the farmer. Well, then you're not paying the roaster what they deserve, so that's not sustainable either. And then what does that mean about what they pay their staff that work at the roastery? Like, it's not a sustainable price, you know? And then to the roaster operator, it's about, you know, having some self-respect and saying, no, we won't go any lower than that price. You can go buy that off someone else. Now, we could beat around the bush. We could start to try and justify some of these prices with things like a fixed cost base or economies of scale. But let's be real. These prices are not sustainable. People don't think they are. It means that the coffee going in there is super lean and tight. We're just about managing to get some coffees from probably Brazil or Colombia, not really anywhere else, that fit in there and taste okay, and go in milk, and a price that's just about justifiable for representing specialty coffee. But you're not going to get anything else out of that £10 a kilo. You know, how sustainable is that price for the roastery? And as a cafe operator, you should be thinking, well, am I really going to get my training, my support, and everything I need from this relationship at these prices? The answer is you shouldn't. If you are getting everything for that price, I mean, that's an anomaly. It's not a sustainable price. And as a roastery, well, it should be obvious, right? You shouldn't want to support this race to the bottom, this price war, for the future of your business, for the sustainability of the specialty coffee roastery that you're growing. So thank you very much, as ever, for listening and watching. And please do like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget that you can support the creation of this content over on my Patreon page. Thank you very much.